I have seen the Harry Potter films way too many times to count. They are modern classics, so many people love them, myself included, and whilst they're all brilliant and magical and wonderful in their own right, I've never actually sat down and decided in order which I think is best to worst. I know what my favourite is, I know what my least favourite is, but today I'm going to rank them all one by one to decide what my order is from best to worst, and everything in between. I'll be ranking them based on a few different factors: how much I enjoy them, how well they're made as a film in terms of cinematography and writing, and what they're like compared to the book, what they added, what they left out, and how I feel about it. So let's jump into the Harry Potter movie ranking. Remember, these are my opinions, but I will argue with you until the cows come home if you disagree with anything I say. So once at the ready, let's jump in. Okay, so first up we've got the Philosopher's Stone, the first one from the series. Or maybe I should say the Sorcerer's Stone, because apparently Americans don't know what a philosopher is. Low-key, does that feel like a condescending choice from the publisher to anybody else? I'm sure Americans know what philosophers are. Anyway, this movie is so wholesome, it's so lovely. It's the first one in the series, and it really matches the childlike wonder from the first book. We get lost in the magic and the castle. We get magical creatures like Fluffy and the centaurs. And I think considering how complex characters like Dumbledore and Snape and even like Harry, Ron and Hermione get later on, it does a really good job of early characterizations of these people. So overall, beautiful movie. It's not the most complex film. There's not like multiple plot lines weaving through it. And as great as the characterizations are, they're not like really deep or multifaceted, but they don't need to be in this one. It's a surface level kids film, and that's not a slight on it. It's supposed to be a fun surface level kids film, and it does it really well. Now, they did leave out some parts I would really have liked to have seen from the book make it to the big screen. Norbert the Dragon, Peeves the Poltergeist, which apparently they filmed and then just decided not to put in. And also like Harry and Draco planning this midnight duel in the trophy room. Those are some things I would really have liked to have seen. But despite missing those things out, I don't necessarily think the film is that much worse off for it. So overall, I'm going to put this film in the B tier. It doesn't have the complexity or the depth of a movie to move it into A or S, but it's beautiful and it's lovely and it's fun, so it's not going to be a C or a D. Pretty middle of the road, honestly. Okay, next up we've got The Chamber of Secrets. It's my least favourite book, and spoiler alert, my least favourite movie. For some reason, despite being one of the shortest books, it's actually the longest movie in the whole series, which is a fact that a lot of people seem to be surprised by when I tell them, but I really think it feels like the longest film in the series, because the pacing is not great. Like, considering this story is primarily a mystery, the mystery in this film isn't that enigmatic or frightening. Like, I know it's a kids' film, it can't be that scary, but this mystery is all about people being attacked. There's writing written in blood on the wall. There's hissing coming from the pipes, and we have plenty of victims of attempted murder. Child victims, I might add. I feel like they just could have done a better job of making this more suspenseful, and despite it being the longest Potter movie, they still left things out. Namely, the Death Day party, which I really wanted to see. I know in terms of CGI it will probably be really expensive to do, but come on, a bunch of ghosts having a party, the Headless Hunt playing sports with each other's heads, how could you not give us that? So overall, I do think The Chamber of Secrets is the weakest story from the series, and therefore I do think it's the weakest movie. I think even the bad Harry Potter films still have enough going for them that maybe none of them qualify for a D, although Chamber of Secrets is close. But it's still in a universe that I love. It introduces Dobby, it's still the characters that I love. It's gonna just creep into C there. Okay, The Prisoner of Azkaban. This juxtaposition right now is going to give you whiplash. We're going so far in the other direction from The Chamber of Secrets to The Prisoner of Azkaban because I love it so much. Where Chamber was my least favourite, Azkaban is my favourite. Not my favourite book, mind, but my favourite film. I mean, come on, what a gorgeous movie. Alfonso Cuarón just like knocks it out of the park. Stylistically, this is a masterpiece. I genuinely think you could take any frame from this movie, take it in isolation, and put it on your wall. It's every single second is like a piece of art. Every frame except the one they actually choose to freeze frame at the end of the film, which is terrible. Genuinely, that might be the worst thing about this movie. But just skimming over that, the darker tones in this film that are starting to come through are really matched stylistically in the way they put the film together. The symbolism of time is really brought through in the visuals, with imagery of like clocks and the passing of time woven throughout the film. And the changes they made to the set allowed for like vast, sprawling scenery, sweeping landscapes that really add to everything. It's gorgeous. It's utterly gorgeous. The story itself is compelling and engaging and interesting. It's well paced and it's really well acted. And in terms of comparing it to the book, nothing stands out that they left out. Like, there's a bit more of the Marauders they could have included, but I'm not like upset that they didn't. So overall, Prisoner of Azkaban is god tier, straight into S. It's a masterpiece, I love it. And so far the films are ranked pretty much exactly how I would rank the books, but that is all about to change with The Goblet of Fire. So The Goblet of Fire is a fantastic book. There are some issues with it in terms of plot conveniences, but overall, narratively excellent. The characters go on great journeys. The twists and the red herrings are also very good, very satisfying. But the movie, for me, does not convey not even half of what makes the book so good. And I get it, okay, this book is the first of the Harry Potter books to really push the length of the story on. 636 pages is a lot to squeeze into like a 2-hour movie. But I'm not just talking about losing plot points. I think the film really struggled and lost some of the magic. And mostly I think that's because director Mike Newell never read the book. And so when we lose things like Ludo Bagman, the House Elves, Bellatrix's trial, the whole story of Barty Crouch and the Imperius Curse, it just loses so much of what makes it an excellent book. Then when you compare it to its predecessor, I think stylistically it loses so much that Alfonso Cuarón got right in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Visually and stylistically, there doesn't seem to be a consistent tone or theme. Just overall, a really disappointing movie. That's not to say it was bad. Of its own accord, separate from the books, it's fine. The dragon scene is cool. The graveyard scene, though not atmospheric enough in my opinion, it's still pretty decent. But for all the potential the book gave this movie, it doesn't measure up for me. It's going into C. And again, it could have been a D, but for objectively, it's an okay film. And it's just slightly ahead of Chamber of Secrets for me. Again, because the film itself, what happens in it, is still okay. Most of the gripes I have is what it could have been with this book as a basis. But as a film, it's okay. It's in C. It's just ahead of the Chamber of Secrets for me. Let's move on to the Order of the Phoenix. Okay, I have some issues with the pacing in this book. It's great in some places. In fact, in some places, I think this has some of the best moments of the whole Harry Potter series. But in other places, it's so slow. With that said, in quite the opposite way to The Goblet of Fire, I think this film does a good job of choosing what to include and what to miss out. It does a good job of keeping the major plot points, while missing out some of the minor things that really slowed the pacing of the book. The Quidditch practices, the prefects, Harry and Cho's long drawn-out train wreck of a relationship, the Percy Weasley storyline. They all factored slightly, but not in the same depth as they did in the book, and I think the pacing of the movie is better for it. Because that allows plot points like the DA, Umbridge, and of course the Prophecy, a chance to shine. Now don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have seen more of the Department of Mysteries and everything they see while they're in there, more of Snape's memories around the Marauders, maybe some of St. Mungo's and the Firenze plot. There are things that would have been cool, but I think ultimately the movie does a good job of picking and choosing what's important to drive the story on. It trims the fat well in a way that I don't think the book did. So overall, I think The Order of the Phoenix I'm going to put into A. And that brings us to The Half-Blood Prince, which is my favourite book. And when it comes to the movie, it's complicated. You could ask me twice in the same week what I think of this film, and I could give you totally different answers. Like, on the one hand, it is my favourite book, and yet I think the movie misses out a lot of my favourite parts of it. For example, Voldemort's backstory, which in my opinion is a heinous omission. I think Voldemort's backstory in The Half-Blood Prince is not only one of the most important parts of that book, but also one of the most important parts of the whole series. So that's a big flaw in The Half-Blood Prince. But on the other hand, I think they do a lot of things in a really, really good way. They show us teen romance, and while the world is being plunged into despair and darkness, and a threat of war with Voldemort grows ever nearer, eventually ending with the death of Dumbledore, it gives us a really good juxtaposition with all that chaos and despair, and the light-hearted teen side of the story. It's a really subtle but very important juxtaposition, which I think they do really well and has a very powerful effect, not just on this film, but in setting up for the Deathly Hallows. What I've talked about that juxtaposition, I think it can be really personified in two moments from this film. The first is Harry screaming at Snape across the Hogwarts grounds, just after Snape has killed Dumbledore. It's an almost childlike desperation from Harry. After arguably the most devastating moment of the series so far, he's screaming and he's relentless, and it reminds us that he's still kind of just a kid. In fact, this film as a whole, it reminds us that Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and indeed like Neville and Luna, they are just children. They're 15, 16 years old, despite everything that they face. And that's epitomized in this scene of Harry screaming at Snape. And also in the scene of Slughorn, when they're in Hagrid's hut. And you've had Harry's childlike temperament from when he's under the effects of the Felix Felicis, and that scene culminates in a very dark, very somber, very mature moment when Slughorn is recounting his memory of Lily and the fish. As he hands over the memory, it's so beautifully balanced. And I think these scenes encompass the film's themes perfectly. So narratively, I am disappointed with the things that they left out, but stylistically, thematically, I think the film is very well put together. It balances itself out, and so it's an A for me. Okay, so now we've got the two Deathly Hallows films left. Let's start with Deathly Hallows Part 1, because it would be weird if we just jumped to the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Deathly Hallows Part 1 gets a lot of stick for its pacing, and rightly so. The film has a lot of running, a lot of walking, a lot of planning, a lot of setup for the climax in the film that will follow. That said, The Fellowship of the Ring is also a lot of running and walking and planning, but that does it really, really well without these pacing issues. Deathly Hallows Part 1 doesn't quite strike in the same way as Fellowship. That said, the Deathly Hallows Part 1's good moments are really good. Godric's Hollow is great. I think the fight between Harry and Ron is done really well. The tale of the three brothers is beautiful. Like, I have watched that clip over and over and over again on YouTube. The animation, the narration, gorgeous. And obviously the Malfoy Manor scene stands out as well. I do think the film does a good job of setting up for the Deathly Hallows Part 2, but there is a lot of bloat to it. It's a setup movie for me, and so that puts it in B. Like a decent B. It's not at risk of dropping into C, but it is a B. The Deathly Hallows Part 2 then, the finale, the climax, it all ends here. The Deathly Hallows Part 2 is excellent. Sure, it misses out a lot, and it makes some choices that I and a lot of the fandom are not necessarily in love with, like having Voldemort disintegrate when he dies rather than just dying as a mortal man, which was sort of the whole point. Having characters like Fred die off screen as well. Both of these should be really poignant and symbolic moments, and yet they're diminished by the way director David Yates decided to present them. That said, I do think the pacing of this film is fantastic. From Gringotts to Hogwarts through the whole battle, it's done very well in general. And honestly, the film doesn't feel like it's more than 2 hours long. It sort of flies by. So overall, an exciting climax, an appropriate ending to the series. Most of the poignant moments are done really well, like the Resurrection Stone, the King's Cross scene with Dumbledore, the Harry Potter is dead scene when Neville gives his speech, and then Neville killing Nagini. Those moments are great, but the few decisions they made that were bad, like Voldemort and Fred, they stop this being an S-tier movie for me. That brings it into A, but it is a high A. It's a good, satisfying ending to the film. So go ahead and argue with me about this in the comments if you disagree with anything, and if you want to see how this compares to my rankings of the books, well, I did a book tier list video here, which you'll want to check out next.